My wife asked me to apologize to her financial mentor for being rude to him at dinner. I said fine. 2 weeks later, I sat across from him and his wife at their kitchen table, opened my laptop and said, "I'm here to make things right, but not the way you expected." What happened in the next 20 minutes ended 2 marriages and got a man fired. And it started because my wife thought I'd just roll over. My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm 48 years old. I work as a structural engineer for a mid-sized firm in Austin, Texas. I've been doing this for 22 years. I assess risk for a living. I calculate load-bearing capacity, stress tolerances, the exact point at which something will break. I'm good at my job. What I wasn't good at, apparently, was applying any of those same skills to my own marriage. My wife and I have 2 kids. Our son, who just turned 19 and is in his first year at UT Austin, and our daughter, who's 15, and the kind of teenager who somehow still wants to talk to her dad. We had a good house in a quiet neighborhood in Northwest Austin. We had date nights, family vacations, a dog named Biscuit who chewed through 2 pairs of my work boots. By every external measure, we had a solid life. Or so I told myself. My wife had been working in commercial real estate for about 4 years when she met her mentor. He came highly recommended. A partner at a boutique investment advisory firm downtown, early 50s. Sharp dresser, the kind of guy who remembered everybody's name and made you feel like the most important person in the room. She started having coffee meetings with him, then lunch, then evening sessions to go over her investment portfolio strategy. She'd come home energized in a way that I hadn't seen in years, talking about passive income and market positioning and building generational wealth. I was happy for her. I want to be clear about that. I was genuinely happy she had found something that lit her up professionally. The dinner where everything shifted happened on a Saturday in March. We were at a restaurant downtown with him and his wife, celebrating my wife's first successful commercial deal, a small office park she'd been working on for months. He ordered a bottle of wine that cost more than our car payment, toasted her like she was his own daughter, and then, about halfway through the meal, put his hand on top of hers on the table and said, she couldn't have done this without the right guidance. Not congratulations to her, not acknowledgement that she'd worked nights and weekends. He positioned himself as the reason she'd succeeded. I didn't make a scene. I didn't throw the wine. I waited until we were in the car and told my wife that what he'd said bothered me, that it felt dismissive of her actual work. She said I was reading into it, that it was just his way of being supportive, that I'd always been too sensitive about him. Too sensitive about him. A phrase she'd apparently been holding in reserve for a while. 2 days later, she came to me with her arms crossed and that particular set to her jaw that meant the conversation was already over before it started. He felt the tension at dinner. He thinks you don't respect the relationship. I asked which relationship she meant. She didn't appreciate the question. He's been incredibly generous with his time and expertise. The least you can do is reach out and clear the air. Apologize for making things awkward. I looked at her for a long moment. You want me to apologize to him? I want you to be a grown adult and not let your ego damage something that matters to me. I said, okay. She blinked. She'd been bracing for a fight and I'd taken the wind right out of it. Really? I'll reach out to him this week. I'll make it right. She relaxed. I'll reach out to him this week. I'll make it right. She relaxed. She actually smiled. And right there, in the way she exhaled that specific relief, something cold settled in my chest. Because that wasn't the relief of a wife who'd been worried about tension between her husband and a colleague. That was something else. Something more protective. I went to the garage, sat in my truck for about 45 minutes, and started thinking like an engineer. When you're assessing a structure, you don't start with what it looks like. You start with the stress points. You look at where the load is concentrated, where things have shifted, where the materials are showing where they shouldn't have. I started reviewing the last 18 months. The portfolio strategy sessions that happened on Thursday evenings, the new perfume that showed up around 9 months ago. Subtle, expensive, not something she bought herself or mentioned receiving. The way her phone was now always face down on the counter. The Saturday networking brunches that sometimes ran until 3 in the afternoon. The weekend trip she'd taken to San Antonio in January for a women in real estate conference that, when I looked it up later, had actually been held in February. I hadn't pushed on any of it. I'd cataloged it and filed it away and told myself I was being paranoid. I wasn't being paranoid. I wasn't being paranoid. That night, after she fell asleep, I went to my home office and pulled up our joint account. I'm the one who handles our finances. Always have been. So this wasn't unusual. But I went deeper than I normally did. I exported 12 months of transactions into a spreadsheet and started sorting by category. The cash withdrawals stood out first. Not huge amounts, but regular. 200 ounce $350, $300 the year, sometimes twice in a single week. Always on days when she was supposedly at a showing or a client lunch. In aggregate, over the past 8 months, it came to a little over $14,000. Then I found the hotel charges. 4 of them, spread across different months. 3 in Austin, 1 in Dallas. All at nicer properties. All for one night. All charged to the card she kept for business expenses. I photographed every transaction with my phone, sent the images to my personal email, then closed the browser and sat with it. The next morning, I called into work saying I'd be remote, drove to a UPS store across town, and printed everything out. Then I went to a coffee shop I'd never been to, ordered a black coffee, and called a private investigator I found through a former colleague who'd gone through a divorce a few years back. I'd actually remembered him mentioning at the time the investigator's name, how thorough she'd been. I'd stored it somewhere in the back of my mind and never thought I'd need it. Her name was Rosa. She was direct, professional, didn't ask more than she needed to. I told her what I had and what I suspected. She told me what she could do in 2 weeks and what it would cost. I said fine. While Rosa worked, I kept everything exactly the same at home. I made dinner twice that week. I watched a movie with our daughter on the couch. I helped our son move a bookshelf into his apartment. I texted him to let him know I was thinking of him and to call if he needed anything. I was present in every room while simultaneously living completely alone inside my own head. On the Thursday of the second week, Rosa sent me a secure link. I opened it in my truck, parked down the street from my office. Photographs. Time-stamped. Him meeting my wife at a hotel off Research Boulevard, one of the Austin ones I'd found in the bank statements. A restaurant near Barton Creek, where they'd had dinner on a night she'd told me she was showing a property. His car parked outside our house on a Tuesday in February, when I'd been traveling for work. And more images from that. His car was there for nearly 3 hours. There was also a document. Rosa had accessed public business filings, which is standard practice. His firm, Aldridge Advisory Group, had a silent investor listed through a holding company. I recognized the LLC name because my wife had set it up 2 years ago when she talked about future-proofing her business income. She owned that LLC. She was quietly funneling money into his firm, our money, $14,000 in cash withdrawals, laundered through her own LLC into his business. I sat in my truck for a long time. Then I called the family law attorney named Helen, who came recommended by my firm's legal department. We met Friday morning. I laid everything on the table, the bank records, Rosa's report, the business filings. Helen was quiet for a while after I finished. Then she said, "You've done more pre-filing documentation than most clients bring me after 6 months of proceedings." She told me what she could file and when, and what my position looked like. It was solid. I told her I needed 1 more week before we filed anything. There was something I needed to do first. I called him that evening. Friendly, easy, like a man who thought it over and decided to be mature about it. I told him I'd been reflecting on the dinner, and I agreed that I owed him a conversation. Could we meet at his place over the weekend, maybe Sunday afternoon? I wanted his wife to be there. "I think it's important that we clear this up as a family," I said, "between the 4 of us." There was a pause. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, that sounds right. Come by around 2. I heard something in his voice. Not suspicion exactly. Confidence. The ease of a man who believed he had already won. Sunday. I dressed like I was going to a meeting at work. Navy shirt, no tie. The kind of steady professional look that doesn't read as threatening but doesn't read as casual either. I printed Rosa's photographs, the bank records, the business filings, and a summary document Helen had helped me draft in plain language. I put everything in a manila folder. Their house was in a newer development in Cedar Park. Nice. Little too big for 2 people. The kind of house that looks expensive but feels like it was built to impress rather than to live in. His wife answered the door. She was warm, genuinely warm, shook my hand, offered me coffee or water. She had kind eyes and a careful politeness that I recognized immediately. The politeness of someone who'd been managing her own private worries for a long time. I said water would be great. They sat together on the sectional. He had his arm across the back cushion behind her. Casual authority. I took the chair across from them and set the folder on the coffee table but didn't open it yet. I appreciate you both making time, I said. I want to be honest with you. I didn't come here just about the dinner. He straightened slightly. What do you mean? I came here because my wife asked me to apologize, and I think she deserves exactly the kind of apology she asked for. The full truth, said out loud with the right people in the room. His wife looked at him. A small movement, almost nothing. But I caught it. I opened the folder and took out the first sheet, the bank summary I'd organized by date. I set it on the coffee table and turned it to face them. Over the past 8 months, $14,000 moved out of our joint account in cash. I've traced where it went. I set the next page down, into this LLC, which my wife controls. And from there, I set the business filing page on top, into your firm as a capital contribution. His face had gone very still. I'm not finished, I said quietly. I set Rose's photographs down, one at a time. The hotel, the restaurant, the shot of his car in my driveway on a Tuesday in February. I didn't narrate them. I just let his wife look. The sound she made wasn't a cry. It was softer than that, like something in her chest deflating. Sweetheart, he started. Don't. Her voice was flat, absolute. I gave her a moment. Then I looked at her directly. I'm sorry. I genuinely am. You didn't deserve to find out this way, and you didn't deserve any of what's been happening in your own house. She picked up the photograph of his car in my driveway. Her hand was very steady, which I found remarkable. I turned back to him. I told my wife I'd come here and apologize. So here it is. I'm sorry I didn't see this sooner. I'm sorry I let it go this far in my own home, around my daughter. And I'm sorry for what's about to happen to your professional life, because that part is unavoidable at this point. He stood up. You can't threaten me. I'm not threatening you. I'm informing you. I closed the folder and stood as well. My attorney filed our paperwork Friday morning. The financial fraud documentation goes to the Travis County DA's office tomorrow. My attorney has a contact there who specifically handles marital asset cases, and I've already sent a summary to the Texas Real Estate Commission, since my wife holds a license through them and this touches her fiduciary responsibilities. The color left his face. Your firm accepted capital contributions for money that was misappropriated from a joint marital account. Your client's investment advisor recommended your firm while concealing a personal relationship with your principal. There are several regulatory angles there, depending on how aggressively the commission wants to pursue it. I picked up the folder. I'm not a lawyer, but I did go to school for 7 years learning how structures fail. This one has a lot of failure points. His wife stood up slowly. She looked at him for a long moment, not angry, which was somehow worse, just searching, like she was trying to find something in his face that wasn't there. Then she walked out of the room. We heard her footsteps go up the stairs. He sank back onto the sectional. I walked to the door. Tell my wife she can expect a call from our attorney tomorrow. She already has the number. I drove home. My wife's car was in the driveway. She told me she was going grocery shopping. She was in the kitchen when I came in, still in her jacket, keys on the counter like she'd just gotten back. She turned around with that particular brightness she'd been putting on for months. How did it go? I apologized, I said, very thoroughly. Something flickered across her face. What does that mean? It means I said exactly what needed to be said in front of exactly the right person. I set my keys next to hers. His wife now knows everything. The photographs, the bank transfers, the LLC, all of it. She went very still. The attorneys filed Friday. You'll get the papers tomorrow. I looked at her, not with anger. I was past that, had moved through it during those 2 weeks in the dark. I want you out of the house by Wednesday. I'll stay in a hotel with our daughter until then. You can't. Her voice broke. The kids. Our son already knows something is wrong. He called me Thursday night, said you'd been acting strange when he came by last weekend. I didn't tell him specifics. That's a conversation we'll have together, on his schedule. I moved toward the hallway. Our daughter figured something out on her own about 2 months ago. She came to me last week. She'd seen a text on your phone when you left it unlocked on the kitchen counter. She was scared to tell me because she didn't want to hurt you. I stopped and turned around. She was protecting you. At 15. Think about that. I watched her face as that landed. That was a moment. Not the attorney papers, not the photographs, not the financial records, when she actually understood the full weight of what she'd done. Our daughter came forward because she couldn't carry it anymore. She'd sat with me on the back porch one evening and told me everything she'd seen and heard. The texts, the way her mother talked on the phone sometimes. The afternoon she'd come home early from a friend's house and found his car in the driveway, and her mother flustered in the kitchen saying he'd stopped by about a work thing. She'd been holding all of it for 2 months, alone at 15 years old. That was the thing I could not forgive. Not the affair, not the money. The fact that my daughter had been made into a keeper of secrets that weren't hers to keep. I went to a Marriott near our daughter's school and we spent 4 days there. She brought her homework, her headphones, her weighted blanket. We ordered room service twice. We watched 3 nature documentaries because she's been obsessed with them since she was 8. She cried once, the first night, and I held her and told her the same thing I believed completely. None of this is yours to carry. You did the right thing. You are not responsible for the choices adults make. She nodded into my shoulder and said, I know. I just wish it didn't hurt. Yeah, I said. Me too. My son drove down from campus that first weekend. He didn't say much when I explained the broad shape of what had happened. He sat with it for a while. Then he asked if I was okay, which meant more to me than I knew how to say out loud. I told him I was getting there. He helped me carry boxes to a storage unit the following Tuesday. About 10 days after I'd left the house, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. It took me a second to place the name. It was his wife. She said she'd been going through their finances and had found other things, other accounts, other irregularities that went back further than I'd found. She wasn't asking for anything. She just thought I should know the full timeline, and she said something that I've thought about a lot since. I kept telling myself the signs meant something else. I think we both trained ourselves not to see it. I wrote back, I think you're right. I'm sorry for your part in this. She responded, I've been thinking about that. I don't think I need to apologize for not knowing. I think I just need to decide what I do with what I know now. We met for coffee a few weeks later. Neutral ground, a place neither of us had been with our spouses. She looked steadier than I expected, thinner, like she'd been through something physically as well as emotionally, but present. Certain in a way she probably hadn't been permitted to be for a while. She told me she'd been dealing with a health issue, nothing life-threatening, but serious enough to have required ongoing treatment that her husband had been largely absent for. He was very good at looking supportive in front of people, she said, less good at actually being there. I told her I understood more of that than I wanted to. We talked for almost 2 hours, about our kids, about what starting over looks like at our ages, about the strange, specific loneliness of being betrayed by someone you'd organized your whole life around. She was funny in a dry, unexpected way. She was honest without being bitter. She asked good questions and actually listened to the answers. When we were getting ready to leave, she said, I know the timing is strange, and I know we're both in the middle of a lot of things, but I'd like to do this again if you're open to it. Just this, coffee, talking. No pressure for it to be anything. I thought about it for exactly as long as it took to realize I didn't need to perform uncertainty to seem appropriately cautious. Yeah, I said, I'd like that. The legal proceedings took most of the following year. Helen was meticulous. The Travis County DA's office did open an inquiry into the misappropriation of marital assets, which added pressure to my wife's negotiating position in ways Helen described as fortuitous timing. The Texas Real Estate Commission conducted a review of my wife's license. She didn't lose it, but the process was documented and public enough to affect her professionally. His firm lost 3 of its top clients within a month of the stories circulating in Austin's fairly small professional community. The regulatory inquiry went nowhere criminally, but the reputational damage was significant. He ended up leaving the firm quietly. The partnership decided his continued presence was a liability, and the last I heard, he was doing independent consulting from a home office. He and his wife finalized their divorce 6 months before mine was done. The custody arrangement settled around our daughter primarily living with me, with structured time with her mother. It wasn't what my wife wanted. It was what our daughter asked for, stated clearly and without coaching to the guardian, ad litem, with a court appointed. Our daughter is not a fragile kid. She knows her own mind. I've always been grateful for that. In that particular season, I was more grateful than I'd ever been for anything. Our son handled it the way 19-year-olds handle things. Imperfectly, in bursts, coming to me with questions on his own schedule. Some conversations we've had at 11 p.m. in parking lots. Some over breakfast. He's working through it. He's also, I think, been quietly watching how I've handled it, and I've tried to be worth watching. About 8 months after the divorce finalized, I wrote something down. Not for publication, not for any audience, just for myself, to see if I could say it clearly. I wrote about what I'd missed, the signals I'd cataloged and filed away instead of addressing. I wrote about the difference between trusting someone and training yourself to ignore evidence because the alternative is a conversation you're not ready to have. I wrote about my daughter sitting on the back porch carrying something too heavy for her, and how that image had become the thing I came back to when I needed to understand exactly what had been at stake. A colleague read it. I left it open on my screen and she saw it by accident, and asked if she could share it with someone who ran a community newsletter for people navigating divorce. I said she could. It ran the following month. I got more emails than I expected. Some from men, some from women, some from people who'd been through something similar years ago and were still processing. What most of them said in different words was, I kept waiting for something undeniable before I let myself see it. I recognized that. I had done the same thing, for the same reason. It's easier to question your own perception than to accept that someone you love has been lying to you. His wife. I should use her name, which is Margaret, and I have been seeing each other for about 7 months now. It is, as she predicted, complicated. The circumstances of how we know each other are not lost on either of us, and we've talked about that directly more times than I can count. What I know is that she is straightforward in a way that I find I need more than I realized. She tells me the truth even when it would be easier not to. She is not performing a version of herself. What I see is what's actually there. My daughter likes her. Not immediately. Our daughter is not a person who trusts immediately, but genuinely, over time, the way real respect is built. Our son has met her twice. He was polite the first time and actually warmed the second, which I'm choosing to take as a good sign. My ex-wife called me about 4 months ago. She didn't fight about anything. She sounded, honestly, exhausted. She said she knew she'd burned the ground she'd been standing on, and she wasn't asking me to forgive her. She was just asking me to let her be a better mother to our daughter than she'd been a wife to me. I told her that was between her and our daughter, not between her and me, but that I hoped she meant it. She said she did. I don't know if that's true. I'm choosing to extend a limited amount of good faith because our daughter needs her mother to be functional and because I'm not interested in carrying resentment past the point where it serves anything. The anger ran its course. I let it. What's on the other side of it is something quieter. Not forgiveness exactly. Not yet, but a kind of settled clarity. I know what happened. I know what I did when it happened. I know what I did when it happened. I know what I'm building now. Last month, I was sitting on my back porch in the evening. The new house, a rental in South Austin. Smaller than the old one, which is fine. It's the right size for the life I'm actually living. And my daughter came out and sat in the other chair, and we just stayed there for a while without talking. Biscuit was in the yard investigating something along the fence. The sun was going down in that particular Austin way, all orange and dust. She said, without looking at me, "Dad, I think you're doing okay." Coming from her, that's the whole review. I said, "Yeah, I think I am too." And I meant it not as a performance for her, not as the thing you say to reassure a teenager. I meant it the way you mean something when you've actually checked. The load had redistributed. The structure was holding. That's what I know how to assess, after all. Whether something is actually bearing the weight or just hasn't failed yet. This one is bearing it. I spent a lot of time thinking about the 2 weeks between the night my wife asked me to apologize and the afternoon I sat down across from him and his wife with a folder on the coffee table. People ask me, when I've told parts of the story, how I stayed so calm. And honestly, the truest answer I have is that I didn't feel calm. I felt like I was operating in a different register entirely. Not above the emotion, just moving through it very carefully. The way you move through a room in the dark when you know where the furniture is. What I've come to understand is that the damage didn't start with the affair. It started earlier with a habit I'd built without noticing. The habit of cataloging things that bothered me and then filing them away instead of examining them. The late evenings that ran long, the new perfume I didn't ask about. The conference had happened a month earlier than she said it did. I saw all of it. I chose each time to find a more comfortable explanation, not because I was naive, because the alternative explanation required a conversation I wasn't ready to have. That's not weakness exactly. It's something more specific, a kind of willful narrowing of vision that feels like trust but is actually avoidance. I think a lot of people live there for years. Some people live there forever. And the cost of it is that you end up complicit in your own deception, which is its own quiet kind of loss. The part that settled the deepest, for me, was my daughter. She's 15. She figured out what was happening before I did. She carried it for 2 months, alone, because she loved her mother and didn't want to be the one to blow up the family. She sat with that weight at an age when her biggest concern should have been school and her friends and whatever show she was watching. When she finally came to me on the back porch and told me everything, she wasn't crying because she was scared. She was crying because she was relieved to put it down. I think about that a lot. What it cost her to protect us both, and how neither of us asked her to. What happened to everyone in this story was the direct result of choices. My wife made choices, consistently, over years, that prioritized what she wanted over the people she was supposed to be accountable to. He made the same kind of choices with the same disregard. And eventually, not because the universe intervened, not because of luck, but because patterns always produce evidence, and evidence accumulates, and accumulation reaches a point where it cannot be ignored. It all came apart. The structure failed because the structure had been compromised from the inside. That's just engineering. That's just how it works. What I want to say to anyone sitting where I was sitting, filing things away, finding more comfortable explanations, is this: your instincts are not your enemy. The discomfort you keep talking yourself out of is information. You're not required to act on it immediately, but you're doing yourself a real disservice by pretending it isn't there. Daniel stayed methodical because that's who he is. He gathered facts before he moved. He made sure when he walked into that room, the truth was undeniable. Not just to his wife, not just to the man across from him, but to the woman sitting next to that man who also deserved to know. He gave her that, and what she did with it. The steadiness she found afterward, the honesty she brought to their first coffee, the life she started choosing for herself, that came from her. That was her. He just made sure she had what she needed to see clearly. That's the only kind of justice that actually holds, not the version where someone is punished. The version where everyone can finally see what's real.